Welcome to the Better Buildings, Better Society podcast. Twice a month, we interview interesting individuals and get insight into what they think makes building better members of society. Subscribe to our podcast and share with your friends. Hi, I'm Stephen Forster, founder and principal of DMA Engineering. My passion lies in the built environment and in the mechanical systems that keep buildings running at their optimum efficiency, while at the same time provide the best possible health and comfort to their occupants. In this way, DMA is absolutely committed to making buildings better members of society. This podcast focuses on energy efficiency through the eyes and experience of building industry professionals. Together with my guest, I will lead all of us on an exploration of how to build better energy efficiency buildings, how to save our clients time and money, and offer practical advice for those interested in the built environment. Join me, a mechanical engineer, outdoor enthusiast, and green advocate as I interview guests with leading edge ideas for creating better buildings and a better society. Hello again, I'm Stephen Forster, principal of DMA Engineering. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Better Buildings, Better Society. This week, we have my good friend, Paul Kriescher from Heart of a Building. He is an expert in the fields of mechanical design engineering with energy management. And we are excited to take a deeper look into his unique perspective to this industry. We are excited to be hosting Paul and thrilled to explore more about how he thinks we can all make buildings better members of society. With that, it is our privilege to welcome Paul to the show and learn more about what inspires him in this industry. So welcome to the show, Paul. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be on this with you, and I'm doing great today. So it's like we finally have a little cool weather that have come into the Denver area, but we're still dry as a bone. So hopefully we get some snow sometime soon. But anyway, I'm doing great aside from that.
It is very dry, isn't it, for November? Wow, yeah. Extremely dry here.
I think it's the latest date that we'll have had our first snow if we get past this Sunday. It'll be the latest date ever. So I'm like, oh, that changing climate, that pesky thing, that is, right? Yeah.
So it rained on Halloween. It never rains on Halloween in Colorado. It snows.
Right, exactly. I know. And it's like, and then, the Pacific Northwest is getting massive flooding right now. They're used to rain, but they can't handle how much they're getting. So again, all the modeling, all the scientific data that's been talking for decades about increasing strength of storms, drier areas, wetter areas, happening. It's like, it's happening all the time right now. So it's like, so all of us have to do our part to make things better for Mother Nature and for the climate. And I know, Stephen, you work on buildings. That's where I work. And it's an area where we can have a huge impact. It's 40% approximately of U.S. emissions. I think it's about 39% these days, but come from buildings, and that's typical across much of the Western world. So as far as climate change-based emissions, whether that's methane, CO2, nitrogen oxides, it's like a huge part of it comes from our buildings, how they're built, how they operate. So, yeah, love to talk and share more about what we're up to.
Yeah, for sure. And just to touch base on that, I read an article that I can't remember the place in British Columbia, but they went from they had their hottest day this 140 days ago. It's 109. And then they had their wettest day ever, right? So they've had two extremes in 1 year within 140 days. So it's just, it proves that that's going on. And you're right. The models are showing that. And then I was also talking to a potential client this morning, and they had done a big CPACE project on a building, and they calculated all the greenhouse gas emissions saved from that building. And he couldn't believe how much was going to be saved. And it was a big number, like 280,000 metric tons per year were going to be saved from the improvements that they were doing on that building. And he couldn't believe it. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a double win. And, if they were to buy their electricity, because they made the building all electric heating, if they were to buy their electricity from a renewable source, right? Excel will allow you to do that on your bill. Boom, they could actually achieve net zero carbon, they'd be carbon neutrality essentially on what they're doing. So good stuff there.
That's beautiful stuff. And that was a retrofit you're talking about, Stephen?
Yeah, retro commits like on a CPACE project. Or a PACE project. Yeah.
No, that's such a huge part. As you and I both know, I'm pulling numbers from different sites. I think this is DOE in my head, or it might be the 360 or another site. Anyway, but basically 91% of buildings, in Colorado, as I understand it, that will be here in 2050, they believe are already here. It's like they're already built. So as far as combating climate change, retrofitting, existing commercial, multifamily, single family buildings is such a critical part. And it's cool that that project that you're working on is finding a way to do it, with PACE financing with a commercial or a multifamily building, and do that and say, yeah, I get to have lower energy and lower operating costs significantly and a lower monthly expense, the way PACE is usually set up. And you're doing such a beautiful thing for the environment at the same time. So it's like beautiful win, 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 win.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I was talking with the building owner and they, talking about that they need to be thinking about marketing and all that, right? And just the tenants could do it because it was a triple net lease. But even so, right, that now the tenant can even market all that. So that's important. So
yeah. Cool. Awesome.
So give us a little bit and just background. I mean, I think you and I met almost 15 years ago. I think it was when we first met at some Excel function many, many years ago. Right. So tell me, just give us a little background about yourself and what you're up to these days. And yeah, I would be really interested to hear kind of the full background.
Sure. Okay, cool. So yeah, I've been in the energy efficiency business since the early 1990s. I started when I was still in college working on a master's degree. I'd started doing some work in the lobbying arena, which you may not know about that as my background. But when I was at the University of Wisconsin, I was working for a group called Wisconsin's Environmental Decade, and then Renew Wisconsin. One was an environmental group, one was a renewable energy advocacy organization. It was like 91 and 92 and 3, I guess, somewhere in that range. But worked with them, learned a tremendous amount about where things were at that time. But it inspired me to say, well, the policy area really fascinates me. It's a really important part, but I want to learn how to do these things, how to design and really help get buildings, is what I chose to focus on, really to be better performing, to follow what had been done by so many people to do everything from earth ships to passive solar, residences, and apply that as the Energy Star program was just emerging at that time. That came out of legislation in 1991 that was signed on the federal level by George H.W. Bush when he was president at that time. And that was a Republican administration that helped really make a huge change as far as helping protect things on the environmental side, especially how it affects building operation and energy use. So anyway, I decided, well, okay, I had already an undergraduate degree in political science and Eastern philosophy. I said, well, let's just do a master's degree in mechanical engineering and economics. So I did that and got immersed in what it would take to really design and better build buildings. And University of Wisconsin, I have to give them some praise. They've really been a leader for decades, starting back in the 1970s, on doing things with passive solar design and incorporating that into their engineering program. So it was a great place for me to be able to get exposed to that stuff and really learn things I wanted to learn. So, after that, I started working with Habitat for Humanity after getting my master's degree. Decided that was an area where I was called to help them do some of their first Earth Smart homes, as we called it. That's after I moved here to Colorado. So I moved here to Colorado in 1995 and worked with them and learned just how badly built, even well-intended people were when it came to homes. Like, just, on the performance side, it's like, hey, we're trying to make affordable housing. We have to build it cheaply. It's like, well, you're making the cost for the utility bills for these future homeowners so high that you're not helping the cause. It's like they could be better off in the bad old drafty apartment that they were in when it came to their utility bills side of things. So they took it very seriously. The Metro Denver affiliate for Habitat for Humanity, who I worked with, took it very seriously, and they did their first Earth-friendly home or Earth-smart home, at that time. Well, I saw that and I was like, gosh, I looked around. I'm like, gosh, even people building custom homes are building them really poorly when it comes to, performance. And I was like, where are the engineers working on this? And I went around trying to find engineering firms that'd be like, oh, Paul, it's interesting what you want to work on. Yeah, we're trying to do that. We'd hire you. Nobody in the metro area, in the mid 90s had that on their radar screen. Yeah, that's peanuts, Paul. We're dealing with other stuff. That's not what we want to be doing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to start my own business because there's a need, big need as far as, anyone from multimillionaires to people, in more affordable homes getting really bad housing when it came to performance. I'm just like, so, jumped in to make a difference, got very involved with the Energy Star program and that time, the Built Green program and other programs as they emerged over the years, whether that was LEED or things like that. But did that work for, from 1997, I started that company all the way until 2019. And worked with you, Stephen, on some great projects, and we diversified into multifamily and commercial buildings and working on that. But it's been longstanding need or passion to work on having buildings be a part of the climate change solution because I learned that in college. I mean, back in the early 90s, I was learning there's a big problem coming on the horizon and we have to do something about it. So anyway, that's what I've been up to during that time. Since selling my company, Lightly Treading, I've been happy to start off Heart of a Building. And Heart of a Building comes from that same root of, passion for all this. But what I've really been fascinated by, and as we start doing these episodes focus on the why story behind people doing high performance homes, multifamily, commercial buildings. Like, why do all the extra effort, all the extra brain damage, all the extra costs, dealing with code officials, dealing with subcontractors that don't know what you're trying to achieve to build a net zero energy or a zero emission or a passive house compliant, building or a high, amazing indoor air quality performing building. It's like all such new stuff. Thankfully, it's not so new anymore, but in the last handful of years, it's become a little more commonplace. But it was so new that I've been long fascinated by those people. And I just said, okay, in collaboration with Colorado State University's Institute for the Built Environment, where I was an adjunct professor for a couple of years and came to know a lot of people there. We brainstormed and said the best way to get some replication of these great projects is to share the stories, less about the nerdy details about, what's the size of that ground source heat pump or what's the size of that solar PV system. Most average people will go to sleep with that. But for a wider audience, they're like, oh, I'm intrigued by why people do this stuff. So we're allowing people that are at that leadership position of being, in those buildings, making those buildings happen, to tell their stories and inspire others to follow them. So we're only just started. We've just produced or finished airing our 4th episode, and they're airing on Rocky Mountain PBS here locally, which has been a great partnership working with them. And we have aspirations to do stories in the coming year that there'll be 12 new episodes that we produce in 2022. And some of them, half of them would be from Colorado, but the other half to come from other parts of the country. We've got some great story leads from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, as well as the Orlando, Florida area. And we're going to look to showcase some cool stories in those areas and have them air on local PBS affiliates there. And then that local PBS affiliate also, right now, they're verbally saying they air the ones that we produced in Colorado as well. So trying to spread the word to let an audience connected to PBS and then people that would stream it to learn more about why people do these amazing buildings. So that's what I'm up to right now.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I mean, yeah, that's a very passionate history, right? You saw a need in the market. Nobody was servicing it. And you're like, I'm going to go after that, right? I'm going to make a difference there. And then, do that then I know it's a slog. Back in 91, when I was back in the early 90s, when I was framing houses, we didn't care about energy efficiency. I mean, we did some stuff, but it's not like what it is today, right? I mean, it's a totally different mindset, the way we build. then. And so to be that pioneer back then and say, yeah, there's a space there for me is great. I guess that fits in a little bit with your Eastern philosophy, right? There's a space there for me,
Right.
which is important, right? So yeah, that's great. And then all the way up to now telling the stories of the building and getting to people's why. So, you understood your why, but now going into that passion of what's the why of the other people, right? Simon Sinek always says that start with why. So digging into that and then being able to replicate, make more awareness with the why and let people understand it and identify with it and run with it is great.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, exactly. So cool.
So I'm curious with this is the Pittsburgh area. Why is there so much interest there? It's not the area I would think that like there's a lot of interest for these net zero buildings, passive house type buildings. Yeah, I'm curious why that area has picked up so much traction for you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've been reading in journals and reading in blog sites and things like that about what's been going on in Pittsburgh for the last decade approximately. And I was really curious about it too. So it's been in this last 6 months that I researched a little more and connected with people there to find out why Pittsburgh has really become a leader in passive house, performance here in the United States. And it's a really kind of beautiful story. It's one that we plan to share in probably throughout several of the new episodes that we're producing. But basically, there was a desire in the early 90s, kind of like the timeline you and I are talking about, that they had two mayors, back-to-back mayors that were in a leadership role of saying, we're transitioning away from being a steel industry. That industry has really left our part of the world. It's like not economically viable to produce steel here anymore. And they were looking around, it's like there was a lot of environmental degradation that had happened because of such an intensive steel industry in that area where things were not done as ideally well as far as operational emissions go and slag and things like that. So there was they looked around and said, we're not a pretty place right now. We'd like to attract people that would like to be in the tech industry to our part of the world. We need to do things to show that we care greatly about making a transition away from where we were to where we want to be. And so, but if mayors are in that position of leadership, there's a grassroots that's around them. And it really proved, as I've been digging a little more, that there are people that are saying they wanted, they live in such a beautiful area. I haven't been to Pittsburgh yet. I'm looking forward to going. I've seen lots of pictures, but the three rivers, that come together there, and just the hillsides, the wooded areas, it's a beautiful natural place, as it were. And they're like, we want to take advantage of that. We want to present that to the world. We want that to be our priority. And so there were people already working, an architect, a woman named Laura Nettleton, who's definitely someone we're going to interview in one of the upcoming episodes. She was at the forefront of that back in the 90s, working on how can we beautify our whole city and our surrounding cities, in such ways. And then she was very much involved with moving things towards adopting passive house standards as they came about in 2010, really. So she was working for 20 years on other things, but in 2010, she started really working on bringing passive house there. And so there's been an interesting upswelling. And then in addition to that, to the credit of that area and the credit to the industrial titans that, were in that area, Carnegie Mellon and the Heinz family and people like that, they have foundations that are headquartered there. And they also said, we are putting some of our philanthropic money into beautifying Pittsburgh and in investing in making public buildings. And then they've also done some investment, I think, into private buildings, but making at least public buildings become very energy efficient and adopting renewable energy and moving towards net zero and zero emissions. And now they're achieving that in buildings that they're working on and retrofitting, now. And so it was a cultural, I guess, a community culture response to the fact that this is what we were. It's pretty messy what's been left behind. We want to be very different from this. And they really came together as a community to now be living that out. And now there's lots of architectural firms, lots of general contractors, lots of subcontractors that are very aware of what it takes to build towards passive house. And so they've they've shifted the paradigm there. And so we want to share that. There's a really cool story too in what they did on the affordable housing side, that there's leadership there that Laura was involved with. I'm forgetting the other architect's name, unfortunately. But the two people were very much involved in getting, for affordable housing, monies that would come from the federal government. There's especially like Colorado Housing Finance has some great loans that come mostly from federal underwritten dollars to help get affordable housing built. Well, in Pennsylvania, they have that same scenario. Well, they started, and this was about 2012, I guess. So, almost 10 years ago now. They got it on with their housing authority, the state housing authority, to say, let's experiment with passive house and see what will happen. And they agreed to it, and they got some projects built. And within 2 years, they were finding that it was costing somehow less money to build to passive house than to code. And that's one that I still want to dig into and find out how the heck they're doing that. But they've now found that. And so thus the housing authority said, oh, we're going to put all of our best financing packaging. So I guess there's a 9% finance option that people in the finance world drool over. To me, I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. I don't know why it's so much better than the 4, but I guess every percent makes a huge difference, of course, to the economic bottom line. But but they get this great financing, but they have to do passive house to get that financing. And so now there's ever more people building affordable housing to passive house because we get the sweet financing, and we figured out, at least some of the contractors, I guess, have figured out how to build it at least the same or less expensively than a code built one. So there's this no brainer. We're doing this stuff. So it's been a really interesting intertwined thing that I'm spinning out a lot for you and your viewers right now, Stephen. But through our episodes, we hope we can present that in a way that's a little more easily digested, I guess. But they're doing some cool things, in that area. And they've even been working. Some of those architects have been working in Colorado and with, I guess, 14 other housing authorities in other states to share that model and what they're doing to get it to be replicated. So Colorado Housing Finance Administration, as I understand it, starting in 2022, is going to start offering, I guess, some sweet financing for passive house based compliance. So that's something I still have to confirm, but that's what I was told by the people in the Pittsburgh area, that that's what's going to be happening in our state, in the very near future. So anyway, it's cool how that's spreading. And so they're beautiful people that they've learned, and they're sharing what they've learned. And I want to get their story told and help share further what they're doing, because they're doing some cool things.
Yeah. And I read an article not too long ago, and I'm going to be off on the percentages, but in Seattle, they just did a passive house project, multifamily, and the percentage cost increase to do the passive house was less than 10%. So I don't want to exactly say what it was, but it was less than 10% to do the full passive house package, and there was energy savings. And this is all compared to code. It was 10% less. Or it was 10% more, but the utility cost was so much less. They're like, it's a no-brainer to do it, right? They're just like, there's no reason why you wouldn't do it. And I talk with the passive house folks, and they say, the wall to volume area works out on multifamily. That passive house is almost like a slam dunk to do on that on those type of buildings. So yeah, it's a good building. It's just. Passive house buildings, we're actually building buildings that are supposed to last for 100 years, right? Where, typical buildings, what are they, 20, 30 years rated? LEED, I think LEED still 60? I think LEED went up a little bit more on how much they're supposed to be. But yeah, 100-year construction is what we should be aiming for, right? Because that's the embodied carbon in the building. So we want it to be there, put it in and leave it. Like you said at the top of the show, most of the buildings that are going to be here in 2050 are already here. The retrofit market's going to be where, we need to be focusing in on. And we're going to have to fix those old buildings, and we don't want to tear them down because of the embodied carbon that's in them. So yeah, we're going to have to figure this all out. And then the buildings we do build, let's make sure they're going to be around for 100 years. So we're not tearing them down with the embodied carbon. So yeah.
Exactly right. So it's it's increasing insulation. It's having enhanced air tightness. It is having better windows, to get there. But it's like you said in that study that you're reading from Seattle, and I bet that's what the people in Pittsburgh meant. I can't imagine the true upfront just construction costs were the same or less, but it must have been that construction cost with all the savings that is proven out very rapidly. It's like from year one, you're like, okay, you just got to do this. This is the way to do it, because otherwise you're being foolish with your money. To be very honest, and that's part of the if that's what I can present in Heart of a Building honestly, and I don't want to exaggerate it, if that's what I'm able to show from what they're doing in Pittsburgh, I'm definitely going to be presenting that to be like, here's what it is. Yes, construction was a little higher, but here it is with the operating cost, and just be like, so if you are a financially minded person and you're in development, you've got to look at passive house. This is like, even if you don't care about the environment, it's like, you just got to look at it and say, this is what makes sense, all the way around. So anyway, that's what we hope we get to share with that, is that type of cool news with plenty of examples. They've got beautiful examples of what they've been doing in the Pittsburgh area too. So it's just like, for TV, it's not like, it doesn't look like a strange little weird box that's kind of aesthetically unappealing. They're like beautiful buildings at the same time that are performing like this. So it's like, so that's gonna be fun, to do that.
So so with this, right, you're bringing awareness, right? You're trying to build up the why. Why are people doing this? Build up the awareness. Right. What's the most, when you're looking at this from, like you mentioned the financial people, if you don't care about the environment, look, it's going to pay you back. And I'm going to say if the percentage of the building is less than 10%, cost more to increase, the first year operating expenditure on utility costs is going to make it so that it's the same. It costs less than doing a code compliant building within the first year. I can totally see that happening. Right. And I could see how that could say it's actually cheaper to do passive house when you factor in the first year utility bill. Right. And the punch, you're still working through your punch list at that point.
Right.
So you're trying to get to people's why. What do you think is the most understood thing that people have about actually, doing green building or really tight construction or non-standard construction?
My impression still with a lot of people is that they think, okay, doing net zero means I put solar on my house or my building, and that takes care of it. So there's the lack of understanding that if your house or your building is built like Swiss cheese, and what I mean by that, you get it, Stephen, but what I mean by that is like, I've done thousands and thousands of blower door tests. So it's like, blower door is a great way of, quantifying and seeing where air leaks in and out of a home or building. Well, there's so many homes or buildings that just leak as if there's multiple windows open, even when you don't have windows open, in the building. And so many people don't understand, like, oh, that's important to fix that before I put solar on. I'm like, yeah, because guess what? You'll become a whole lot more comfortable. And you might not have to have the house set to 72 in the wintertime anymore. You might find, hey, 70, 69, maybe even 68 feels pretty comfortable because it's not drafty and having surfaces that, in addition to air leakage, poor insulation, if they have that problem in their home or building. Because then you stand in the home, if you're in short sleeve shirt, on a day like today where it's, I guess it's up to 34 right now, but it's a cooler day than we've had for a while. You stand near an exterior wall that's fully insulated, it's going to feel cold. Well, if you got better insulation, or if you have passive house quality insulation, you stand against that wall in the short sleeve shirt and you're like, is it 30 some degrees outside? I can't tell. I feel like it's 70 degrees outside because I'm so dang comfortable in my house. So it's like, so people don't understand that maybe they'd want to for environmental reasons, like I'm just going to put solar on and I'll be doing a good thing. And you will be, but you're missing out on making it more comfortable for yourself and having a whole lot better experience in the space. If it's a commercial building, having a better space to be working in, or if it's a school, have a better place to be learning in. There's all these beautiful benefits that go along that just putting solar on don't touch at all. So I'd say that's the persistent misunderstood part of it, is building as a system and benefiting as a system with comfort and having good indoor air quality too, things like that. If you go to the step of putting in mechanical ventilation after you've tightened up your home or building, because To go on that tangent for a moment, there's been plenty of guys, especially plenty of contractors, where they said, Paul, if we tighten this house up too much, we're going to make everyone sick in here. What the heck do you want to do that for? Why is that so important? I was like, well, right now we don't know where the air is leaking from, and we showed in like many houses, air was leaking in through like garages, attached garages in homes more than like any other place from the outside. It's like, the family's got like 3, like lawn mowers or whatever, and open gas tanks and some open paint cans in there. It's like, so that's the air that you're bringing in. That's fresh air. You're bringing in air from that space predominantly that's got all sorts of volatile organic pollutants in it. And that's what we call acceptable. It's like, that's what we want. So anyway, if you put in, a known source of balanced mechanical ventilation for an energy recovery ventilator or heat recovery ventilator, and like, oh, I'm getting it from a source that's as good fresh air as I can have from the outside. And even if you have the problems of a forest fire, like we experienced this past summer big time, at least you have the ability to run that through filtration and reduce the amount of particulate, at least on that side that's in that outside air and bringing it in. So you're going to have truly as good an air as you can. And if we tack on the issue around COVID, it's like, heck, again, the way we build homes and buildings for especially homes and multifamily for so long was like, it'll naturally leak fine. Doesn't do it when it's 60 degrees outside. Doesn't leak worth a damn, at that. And it's like, so you just get everyone exhaling if they have a cold, if they have COVID, breathing that into the air and it's not being exchanged out. But if you have that that energy recovery HRV or, HRV, energy ERV, there we go, or heat recovery HRV, you have that equipment installed, then it's like, I'm getting the fresh air, I'm getting the exchange that you'd want to have to be as healthy as possible. So it's just so many things that people they don't know yet very well, about all those things that can benefit them beyond simply just putting solar. I don't know. So there's a long answer for you, Stephen.
Well, no, I think you nailed it, right? It's a system, right? And it's a building system. Right. You got to look at the whole system. It's just the solar system is just one part of the bigger system, right? The mechanical system is one part of the bigger system, right? And they all work together. And that's the important thing. You just can't look at them as like, that's just the mechanical system, and this is this system, and this is this system. And not think that they don't interact with each other in some fashion. So I think that is a big thing that the industry needs to be working on overall, is that everything is a system, and it's all, it's going to work together. Climate change is the same way, right? It's a big system, and one thing over here is going to affect something here. Same with the building. One thing over here is going to affect this over here, and we need to be aware of that. Bring that awareness. It's like, just because you put solar on doesn't mean you have a good building. It just means you got solar on your building. Right. It could be the worst way to be spending your money. So, spend your money wisely, look at it holistically, and provide the right system. So, yeah. So, right. And indoor air quality, you touched on indoor air quality now with COVID, right? Everybody is more aware about indoor air quality and the importance of it. And having a leaky building is not really giving you proper indoor air quality, because you can't really manipulate the air the way you need it to be to get it to where you want it and make sure it's fresh where it needs to be and in the breathing zone and all those other areas. So there's a lot to that. So
exactly right. Even if people are willing to open up their window on a cold day, it sometimes doesn't bring in the air exchange that you really want, in that space. But then also it's like, well, maybe you are, but you're getting really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And how long are you going to keep that door open, right? Or that window open, right? Just as long as you can bear it, then you're going to shut it. So
exactly. Yeah. So cool.
So with a long history, what you learned now, if you could take something back to when you first started, what would that be? What could you take back with you?
What would I take back in time, as it were? Well, I wish I could take back to mid-90s, the passive house standard, but it didn't exist yet at that time. But I would love to have done that. I mean, there have been people I had the pleasure of working with at that time that somehow by serendipity, because there wasn't really the World Wide Web yet in any sort of functional way, but somehow connected with a lot of people around Colorado, across Colorado, that were wanting to either like live off grid or wanting to live in a way that was sustainable and more in harmony with nature. We have a beautiful environmental ethos in the state, and there were people that wanted to, like they hired me to help them do passive solar, design, for their home. Or we did one for one small apartment building. I remember doing in the late 90s. So there are people that were wanting to do the right thing, and I wish we could have taken them the standards for passive house then, because they'd be like, "This is awesome. I want to do it." But we did have a problem. We didn't really have the computer technology at the time to do the modeling the way we are able to now. So I guess we would have had all of that have to advance a bit more. But there were people that wanted that type of help if we could have had it available. So so that's like really like paradigm shift, wishful thinking, I guess. But otherwise, I don't know. I enjoyed the journey I was on, so I don't really have many regrets, about it. In that regard, I just wish, I wish we could have somehow had more and more buildings being net zero energy then already. And I wish we were further along in this course now, where it's like, I wish we were like Germany. Germany's still trying to improve and do things better, but I wish we were more like them, where like so much of their building stock is already in a beautiful place, and we're catching up, to a place like that. So I guess that's what I'd wish for.
Yeah. So, having a standard back then that we could actually convey the information that everybody was after. I understand the energy modeling. I mean, I remember, load calculations and just doing basic load calculations way back when. And, how that's changed from what we can do now with the energy modeling, right? It's so far advanced on the modeling that's out there. And then, taking that into the future, you're looking at the why for, buildings through your work through heart of the building. Where do you see, taking that? So now we went back. Now going forward, what do you think will, just kind of a little crystal ball, what do you think the future holds in general for the built environment?
Well, I believe, I tend to wear rose-colored glasses, but I really believe that with everything that is moving on the international, national levels, and what has been changing technologically, at the ground level, where we look at air source heat pump efficiency increases and ground source heat pump cost effectiveness increases, it's just like, I really believe, and efforts by cities like Denver and many others across the country to say, we are going to encourage and then push you, if you need to be pushed, the building industry to be a fully electrified building stock in what you're building new and in what is being retrofit with anything that requires permitting, which is most, renovations and retrofits need that. Not all, but most of them do. So it's like anyone who's not trying to find ways to get closer to their building envelope, needing passive house, and then looking at having simpler, well, not always simpler, but smaller heating, cooling equipment through electricity, air source and ground source based heat pumps is the current best technologies. That it's like you're behind the curve. You're building things that I would assume we'll see, valuations of homes that have natural gas in them be less. If you had like the same square footage and maybe the same location, you'd be like, I would think in the coming years, it's like, well, that's a burden because there's, there will be some form of carbon tax. I hope it's a carbon tax on a national level that has a carbon dividend with it, which is a beautiful way of having money come back to people, especially people that are working class, middle class, but everyone would get it, but to have a dividend come back. Anyway, but that they would be, you'll be hit, like if you buy a home with, especially if it's still like got an 80% efficient boiler or something in it, let's say it's 10 years down the road, we're in 31 at that point. I would think the value of it would be like, oh, you're taking a hit on that, getting that one, man. Look at the one down the road that's got the air source heat pump in it, because you're not going to get hit in the same way. So I believe those types of things are going to continue to shift in our economics. And I believe the built environment is responding. It basically moves slowly. It shifts slowly. But basically it is shifting. It's seeing the writing on the wall. It's seeing, electrification's happening in transportation. Yeah. Electrification's happening in our built industry. We need to be aware of this, and more people are getting trained, becoming more aware of it, and seeing that that's where the future is going, with them. So that'd be my maybe 10-year out crystal ball, is that at that time, I really believe all new construction will be all electric homes and buildings. We'll still have all those retrofits to be tackling, but we'll see how well we've made inroads into that. I hope deep inroads into that. But I think even just the legislation, here we are in November of 2021, I think the legislation that just passed from Congress and was signed by President Biden on this infrastructure bill, the little things I'm hearing leak out from that is that there are going to be lots of incentives to help electrify, like affordable housing. Like Colorado Public Radio, they just had a story on that, where they're in Western Colorado looking at projects that will likely be converted to being all electric based mobile homes, and how they go about doing that, and that there's incentive dollars to help weatherize them deeply, to make them livable. In some cases, they're not very livable for most people, but to make them better than livable, very comfortable spaces, but also bring them up to be electric powered spaces where they're adding solar onto to those properties. So it's all of that, shift it's happening right now, and I think will continue to happen.
So you're saying that it's going to have to be government led versus private led is kind of where you're thinking. Is that pretty much what's going to be the big driver?
That's a great question, Stephen. I really believe the industry is not going to have to just be pushed by government to get there. I believe industry itself is leaning into it, but there's certainly, without question, it helps, when there's like financing that comes from the Colorado Housing Finance Administration, to help affordable housing be like, hey, you get the better rates if you do far better performance. It's like, okay, that big old carrot out there definitely drives things. And you could say that's government led, I suppose, but it's just the financing, and it's the private sector responding to meet that. But so yeah, it's an interesting web, I suppose, of that. I mean, I really, I look at like Thrive Home Builders that we showcased in one of our new episodes. I mean, Gene Myers, the owner, there's been at this 30 years, and he's not alone, in doing net zero emission homes now. There's many more of them doing it, and they're not doing it because they get some credit from the government. They're doing it because they've found how to economically build it and make money at it, and they're finding a lot of people satisfied to buy it. So that's very free market in that perspective. So I think it's going to be an and, as opposed to, has to be government led and then people respond. I don't think so. I think it's going to be a both more than a just one, part of that.
Well, and I think just kind of looking at, the projects that we've worked on, the projects we've worked on together, some of it was, the financial base, but then some of it was people just wanting to do, the right thing, right? Go a little bit above and beyond. So I think there's enough of those leading edge, right? Leading edge people, bleeding edge people that wanted to do these type of technologies when they became out there. And then adopting them. And we're the early adopters, right? There's always the early adopters. There were the people that came out as soon as Tesla came out with the Model S, they had to have it, right? And even though it was only the 130 mile range Tesla, they went out there and bought it. And I'm sure now they're on to the big Tesla S with the 300, right? So they've already upgraded, or the Tesla Roadsters, right? I mean, I think you and I were at a Passive House event, and there was a guy out there with the Tesla Roadster that was there. Yeah, I can't remember.
Steve Stevens, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think it was him. It was Yeah, I think it was him. So, right. I mean, instantly had it, the Tesla Roadster and then the Tesla S, right? Just instantly got him. So there's always going to be those early adopters. And so I think as we, that there is the early adopters, and as it becomes more mainstream, and then as it gets to the people that would not normally do it, that's, I think, where the government may have to give just a little bit of a push to get people to move that direction. So.
But I'll say, along those lines, Stephen, I will hope, and I don't know if you guys want to plug it into the podcast at some point, but I would hope that one of the drivers that helps it, that could be really free market driven with government pushing a little bit, I guess, but it's like if we had a carbon tax that had a carbon dividend. So there's a group called the Citizens Climate Lobby that's been around for at least a decade, has been advocating for this for a long time, but it's basically like, our economics have never quantified the environmental harm that's come from discharging pollution into the air and into the water. So it's like, well, in this case, let's at least agree to be like, yep, for every, metric, basically for every ton of coal, for every, cubic foot of natural gas, million cubic foot of natural gas that is extracted. It's like, okay, extraction companies, you have to pay a fee because we're trying to have the economics say there's an impact, from your product. When it's burned, when it's released into the atmosphere, have that done. It's like, if that were put on at the point of extraction, the rest of the economy will adjust to that. And you'd see, of course, higher prices for gasoline. You'll see higher prices for natural gas-based heating. You'll see higher price-based electricity from coal. And the message starts to come through to so many other people that when it's affecting their pocketbook, they're like, this is uncomfortable. I don't like this. And they may scream at politicians saying, what have you done? But if there's a dividend, and we experimented with all kinds of means of dividend type setups during COVID, as far as money being there to float the economy and keep it from completely having huge problems, this would be much less impactful. But it's like, if you're taking the tax dollars that are raised at that time of extraction, and as the Citizens Climate Lobby and other groups, profess is what they are advocating for in the legislation, that they want to see passed, is basically like, okay, that gets passed back to all of us that have a Social Security number through either a monthly or a quarterly check that would come to us. That, helping to offset the fact that energy prices have gone up. Well, some people just spend it going to McDonald's. Some people would spend it, maybe they'd save it for the college, their kids' college fund. But a lot of people will be like, part of my problem is like, I do have a home that's not very energy efficient. I am going to do some things to make it, improve upon it so I don't have such a high bill connected to this form of heating that I have, and start making some shifts. Because that's been the problem, is like the market can work beautifully, but when it's blind to a whole component of pollution from that, it's like that externality, as economist nerds like to call it, is a big problem. It's like you don't have a marketplace that can respond appropriately because you're just ignoring it. Well, we're ignoring that there's these millions, hundreds of millions of metric tons of pollution going into the air every year. That's not part of the economic equation. Well, you got to bring it into the economic equation, is my belief. It's like you can't let that externality just ride out there and have it not be included. Now, Xcel Energy, our local public utility, has done things in the last 10 years to start incorporating the costs of what they pollute into the atmosphere into their metrics as far as looking at things. So I credit them, but that's an example of one public utility, and maybe there are other public utilities, but there's so many other places where it's not accounted for. It's not accounted for gasoline in the petroleum industry. It's not accounted for steel manufacturing. It's like so many places where we burn coal or use natural gas or use petroleum. It's like it's not accounted for. So it's like, so I've had many conversations with good friends who are more politically conservative. Like, you're messing with the free market. I'm like, dude, the free market is blind to this. And it's like, free market was not created by God. It was created by humans, and we're blind to this issue. And we need to actually have it be something that takes account for the damage that we're doing to God, to nature, whatever you want to call it. We have to account for that. It's like, otherwise, we are pretty bad stewards of this planet. I think we've been proving that, I guess, in recent years. So it's like, so anyway, that's one that I got a short video on our YouTube channel about carbon dividends if people want to nerd on that. But look at Citizens Climate Lobby. It's a great group. You'll learn everyone will learn about carbon dividends if you check them out.
Well, and I think it's important that everybody kind of knows their carbon balance sheet, right? And I think that's important. And I think it comes back to externalities on a lot of different things that can be factored into stuff. And, one that the plastic bottle industry, they were trying to say that you got to account for the cost of recycling the bottle at the time of manufacturing of the bottle, right? So as soon as it's manufactured and sold, the cost of recycling is already built into the cost of the bottle. That way we don't end up with them floating around in the ocean. There's already, they've already built a stream for that to be recycled once it's already put into the system. So that's another area that there's an externality. I think you could also take it to the electric vehicles with batteries, that at the time of the cost, there should be something in there for the recycle of the batteries so that we don't, there's, people in third world countries are taking out all the, the metals out of there in very hazardous conditions. And that shouldn't be what we want to do either, right? We want to have a balance there. So I think you could argue there could be a little bit of an externality there on the battery recycling. So back to what you're saying, if there's just a little bit of externalities taken into it versus the first cost, which is always a big cost. If you're ever just looking at everything at the first cost and you're not looking at a longer term view, you're short-sighted and missing all that stuff. So if you can take that longer term view on that stuff and have that cost built in at the first cost, it'll balance things out, right? It helps people understand the true cost of what's going on. So I think there's going to have to be more of that going on so that we have better educated decisions on the decisions that we're making. I don't think everybody has the right decision, that right information in front of them. I think if they did, they'd make different decisions. So
well said, Stephen. Yeah. And that's honestly part of what we're hoping to do with Heart of a Building, is at least broaden the audience so people are like, have a little more information, a little better information, see that buildings, you don't have to be a millionaire. It's not bleeding edge anymore, to build a really good home or a really good multifamily building or a really good commercial building. It's like the technology's there. We know how to do it. We know how to do it really well now. So that's what we hope to be like, oh, that's not space age anymore. We can do that stuff. It's like, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's all about education, right? So that is more education we can get out there. I think it's better for everybody. So, if you had extra money on a project, how would you recommend a client use it? Right? I mean, very rarely do we have extra, but if there was a client that all of a sudden came into extra money on a project from whatever means, and they're like, hey, how do you think we should spend it? What would you recommend?
Without question, better air tightness and better insulation. That is the best place to spend your dollars.
Okay, and then kind of to the next step, if somebody was just consider building or designing or purchasing a building, let's just put it back an existing building that they're getting ready to purchase. What would be your one recommendation for them?
As far as what to look for in that building?
I mean, what would you recommend if somebody was like, hey, Paul, I'm getting ready to go buy this building. What do you recommend? Right? I mean, just somebody off the street.
I'd recommend hiring a firm like DMA or some other firms to do a detailed evaluation with preferably energy modeling of your building, so you know what you're buying for the long haul as far as the performance goes. So to have essentially a commercial multifamily energy audit, done of that building, and do it with people that know how to do it, and include some diagnostic testing like infrared cameras and blower door testing to be like, it's basically, you're having a building doctor give the building a physical exam, before you buy it. And it's like, so it allows you to do a bit of a test drive of how it's going to operate. And you'll know it's like, whoa, I got some expenses coming with this baby if I buy this thing, So it's like, it's an ounce of prevention to prevent a pound of cure, the old British saying of that, So it's just like, but people is like, well, it costs a lot of money to hire firms to do that. I'm like, well, relative to what you might have to pay for that building on maintenance and operation upkeep, it's like, I would do that. So that'd be my recommendation.
Yep. Great. So what's been your biggest mistake, design, whatever, or failure that you experienced, and what did you learn from it?
I'd say the biggest thing, maybe about 10 years ago or so, I was really wanting to get involved with more like large multifamily, large affordable housing areas. And, I was getting in, I think, over my knowledge head at the time, though I was learning about those projects. And I wish I would have brought in other additional expertise beyond me and my team, because we were so, maybe that might have been more than 10 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, something like that. We were still very residential focused, and we were getting in a little over our heads on understanding, everything from the different mechanical systems that are in like affordable housing, multi-story buildings. And we couldn't give good advice. We basically said, well, we're not sure what's going on here. And that's a big part where they were having some problems. We learned a year later, but it's like, I wish I would have been wise enough to look for help in areas where we were still learning instead of necessarily learning on the job with people. So that's one that pops to mind. I remember feeling badly about that. Was like, they paid us decent money. We gave them kind of partial information, like really very envelope-based problems, but we gave them very cursory. We didn't give them bad information. We just didn't give them much information about what was going on with the mechanical system. So I wish I would have done better with that, type of thing. So,
well, I think sometimes we all find ourselves in a situation where we're like, we get into it. Right. And then you're like, wow, okay. We all get into those situations. I think I can totally relate. I can go on hours about me being in those type of situations. Put myself in a lot of those positions because I'm a risk taker. So that's just kind of that's my nature, right? Sometimes in a rock climbing route, sometimes building vans. That's a whole nother podcast.
Good. Well, awesome.
So what is your favorite building and why?
My favorite building. Man, that would be a tough one. Like my favorite building I've worked on, or just my favorite building, period?
Favorite building in general.
Wow. Gosh, that probably changes on a weekly basis. But right now, I'll say I'm really intrigued by, very fascinated by, I guess, drawn to. We are planning to do an episode on it this coming year. But the Rocky Mountain Institute built a building that they called their Innovation Center in Basalt about 5 or so years ago now. But the building is, it's a 3-story small commercial building that has no mechanical heating or cooling in it. And in the Basalt, Colorado, climate zone 6, bordering on 7, in that area. And just like, how have you guys done this to not have mechanical heating or cooling in an office building? And they have some interesting chairs that can provide heat to the person sitting. And they do have some electric mats down on the ground floor, northeast corner for a couple of the rooms. But otherwise, it's relying on the natural rise and fall and the natural balance of enough sunlight coming in, even in the wintertime, to provide enough heating. And so it's like, so to me, right now, that one is just like so dang cool, to have done that and proven it. So I guess that's the one currently I'm most fascinated by. So you familiar with that one a little bit, Stephen?
Oh, yeah. No, I was just getting ready to say good choice. Yeah, that's a good choice. Yep. There's some cool technologies going on there. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the occupants feel about it. I haven't heard any. I know about their technologies, but I haven't heard exactly like what an occupant survey would say.
Like so many buildings, it was basically unoccupied for the last 16 months. I guess now in the summer, some people started to go back into the building finally, but it was a long stretch because I don't think it was finished 5 years ago. I think they started 5 years ago. I think it was only occupied for about a year before COVID. So they really haven't had a lot of experience yet. So hopefully they start getting more experience with how it's really working for the occupants. So.
Well, and I'm going to guess just back to, the occupant comfort. I mean, it's going to come down just to how to utilize the building. I mean, we find that with a lot of buildings. How do people actually use it? There's the tweaks that need to be made, and you just got to tune the building to how they're actually using it. So.
Right. Exactly.
So what is your favorite place and why?
My favorite place. Well, that's almost any place I could be in the mountains are my favorite place. So, I mean, there's been several areas I really love that have had forest fires in the last few years. So it's like that part is very interesting. I still like going to those places, and it's just a little sad, and you see that's part of a natural cycle, but it's still sad, as far as for the human life cycle to see a beautiful area. There's lots of beautiful. Right now, I'm going to say I'm really lured towards. My wife and I both are very lured towards the Pagosa Springs area. And honestly, I was hoping this coming weekend I was going to go. We're going there. I was hoping to do a little skiing at Wolf Creek. Well, I'm bringing my bike because we've had no snow. So I'm still going to be biking there. But so that's an area that whole area, the natural area around that town, I really like a lot. So, I'll say for now, anywhere in the mountains and leaning a little bit towards the Pagosa Springs area for right now.
Good. Yeah. Good places. I've spent time at Pagosa as well. So yeah, it's great. Yeah. So for someone listening and they would like to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
So they can email me at, paulk@heartofabuilding.com. They can go to our website at www.heartofabuilding.com, and they can find all ways to connect, that way to me. And they can give me a call at 303-525-1158.
Sounds good. So, thanks, Paul, for joining us today. Learned a lot. The heart of the building, totally excited about that. It's good work getting the message out there. It's good stuff. So that's totally cool. I think what we really need to be focusing on in the future, and just, how we go about things, that passive house standard. I've said it before on another podcast. I think passive house should somewhat become a standard, right? We should just start adopting that standard for it's easy enough to do. Not every building can achieve it, but have it so you can get within X amount of passive house, I think would be great. Electrified buildings, that's the future. It's just the way we're headed. And then make it a smaller HVAC system. For somebody that designs HVAC systems, I'm all about making a small HVAC system. And when we make them small, they're a lot less to operate. And we can actually design some really cool stuff within the same budget, right? We can do radiant cooling. We can get very cool with indoor air quality, how we're doing that, the monitoring. We can spend more money on controls, get higher occupant comfort with that stuff. So a smaller HVAC system is totally cool. So yeah, great. Good stuff. And then thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. You can find us at worldwideweb.dma-eng.com. You can find all the information about the podcast and more there. So yeah, thanks for taking the time and listening to this.
Thanks so much, Stephen.